Welcome to Burnout. We're going to talk about burnout. First things first, just thought I should let you know is that, just it's a really weird thing, 2020, but 2021 is kind of the continuing of 2020, let's be real. But the one thing for sure is that we don't know what people are going through, so it's hard to know whether or not if they're doing okay. So their emotions may be high, they may not be as high. But the thing is just to note to be kind to one another during this time because mental health is taking a huge role. We're not used to having to deal with a pandemic. There's no guide for us. So it's very hard for us to be 100% there all the time and present. And you may be feeling like you're overwhelmed and drowned out at this point. And that's okay. It's been quite the year. For those that do not know, my name is Chloé Messdaghi. I'm the chief strategist over at Point 3 Security. I'm also the co-founder and Hacking is Not a Crime, but also the president and co-founder of WOSEC and the founder of We Are Hackers. That's my URL. If there's anything you want to know about me, it's right there. Also my Twitter and Instagram. Feel free to follow at any time. My DMs are always open. Now, what I want to do is talk you through different scenarios of what burnout can feel like. So you have an idea whether or not you have dealt with burnout personally. So I want you to imagine you're driving in your car. Now, when you're driving your car, there's a moment where you may be like, what happens if I don't look into my mirror when switching lanes? That means if I get in a car accident, I don't have to go to that place. I don't have to do that task. I don't have to do that project. I can actually get a break from everything. Unfortunately, a lot of the times with people, when they have burnout and it has increased without getting treatment or taking time off, they can have these quote unquote suicidal thoughts. Not necessarily suicidal themselves, but thoughts of just needing a break that even a car accident would do a huge favor for you. And when you have those thoughts, that's time when you need to reevaluate. And this is when you have burnout where it's gone so bad that you just keep pushing it away. So one thing to note about burnout is that if you don't get help or you don't take time off, what ends up happening is that you yourself can end up going into severe depression and severe anxiety. So it's really important is to be aware of this moment. So if you ever have a moment like this, that is a time for you to take time off immediately. But burnout can kind of trickle in like this, where you used to take you a couple minutes to respond to an email. Now it takes hours, maybe days, maybe weeks. And that's just letting you know that you're stressed out, you're overwhelmed because your inbox is flooded. And to be honest, like I'm one of those people that's like a zero inbox person and I love having zero emails. So if I see like a couple of emails, I'm like at the edge of my seat. So if you're one of those people that like you're not doing your normal pace and your normal ability of responding to emails, that's usually a key sign right at that moment. But sometimes it could also come as if you have your friends or your family members calling you or texting you and you don't pick up. It's not necessarily that you're too busy. It's because you just don't want to take on more. In a sense that when you talk to your friend or family, you're worried they're going to tag you onto a task and you already feel like you're floating or you're like in a flood and you're trying your best to get air and survive and everything, but the reality of it is that you're having a problem with balancing your personal life and work life. And this is usually very noted when you're not taking calls or text messages from your friends and family. Once again, not because you're busy, it's because you're so overwhelmed that you just can't even deal with anything. But the one thing about burnout is that you can have suddenly like anger, some sadness, like these things, it just feels like there's either the sense of helplessness, this emptiness, or sometimes people would say like they feel like they're drowning, they're overwhelmed, and they don't know what to do about it. So the thing you want to note is that burnout is very different from stress. And I really hope you understand this. Burnout happens when you have ongoing stress that hasn't been dealt with. So that means like you have one stress project and then another and then another and another one, but you never treat it. Burnout is a little different because the thing is between stress and burnout, for example, like, oh God, I had a stressful day. I'm going to have a glass of wine. and you'd feel a little bit better. You take a bubble bath, you'll feel a little bit better. When you're burnout, you can drink all the one you want, all the bubble baths in the world you can have, but the reality is it doesn't do anything. But the other thing about burnout is that when it comes to due dates or events, you will do whatever you can to push them out, or you'll forget about them as well. But most of the time it's like you just can't do it anymore. And you'll hear this phrase quite often: I can't do this anymore. But you're stuck. The other thing is to note that usually the other thing with stress is that when we're stressed out, we reach out for like a glass of red wine, like I mentioned. But it could also be that you take on more caffeine because you feel exhausted, which is one of the things about having burnout. So you might actually go back to smoking cigarettes. You might actually be smoking something else. Or you might be going and craving the salty, sweetie things. But the reality to also note is that even when you're burned out, you might put on weight or you may lose weight drastically. And this is usually one of those things, is that when you're overwhelmed and stressed, what do? We go for Ben & Jerry's, or we just don't eat. And so that's the thing, is to keep in mind. But also the exhaustion is the reason why we up our caffeine intake. So the one thing to note is that if you are taking in more cups of coffee than usually, so say for example, you usually drink like 1 cup of coffee, now you're drinking 2 or 3, it might be a time for you to reevaluate what's going on with your life and take a break. Because if you're taking more caffeine in, that just means that you're over pushing yourself now at this point. And caffeine is not going to fix your problems. It's just going to make it seem better at that moment. But in reality, you're still dealing with a lot. And that's the same with any recreational drugs, and also alcohol usage and cigarettes, is to be aware that if you used to drink like maybe once a week, but now you're drinking daily, 1 drink a day, that's a sign. And I really want to be very transparent with you, is that burnout has also been linked to alcoholism. So if you are drinking every single day a glass of wine, I know we usually are like, well, that's fine. That's what they do in Europe. But to be honest, you don't want to be doing that. It's it's setting you up for a situation that you may not have control later on. So it's really smart is to be cognizant of your self-awareness. But burnout, what it usually is like, I'm so tired, I'm exhausted. Like no matter how much hours of sleep I could get 9, 10 hours. I wake up and I just feel so tired. And that's the thing with burnout, is that you have this sense of your battery is like drained all the way, and you have not recharged your battery for forever long. So think of yourself as like some sort of like device that has never received a charge for quite some time, and you've been running on low battery. That's how burnout works. And in security, that's a really scary situation, because when you're burned out, you're not 100% there. So if your brain is not 100% there, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to catch things in time. And this is when we have those vulnerabilities that don't get patched properly. This is when we don't patch at all. This could also be that, we're feeling overwhelmed on our team. And if our team all feels stretched thin and overworking our hours, because that's how security is, and we're on the edge of our seat 24/7 in this industry, we're going to feel burned out. And to be honest, burnout has been an ongoing huge issue in our industry, even before the pandemic. So it's really important to acknowledge that burnout is a serious thing, because it puts companies at risk, it puts yourself at risk, it puts your colleagues at risk. But the reality is that there isn't too much support. And that's the problem here. So I just want to first reiterate, I'm not a therapist. I'm just like you, in a sense that I've dealt with burnout, and I've learned some techniques and tricks to make it much better, to balance. Granted, there's times where I do get burned out, but I also know how to reduce that amount. So the most important thing from this talk is what to do when you're getting to that point where it's getting too much, or for you to be aware of how to reduce that burnout sensation. But the first things first, what you want to do is always see a doctor. 2 years ago, I was feeling like I had symptoms of burnout, and so I went to go get my vitals checked. Turned out I was low in iron. And so when I started taking iron supplements, I started feeling much better. I didn't feel exhausted. I had I felt like I can have the ability to think like usually. So it's really important to see a doctor, get your vitals checked out, just to make sure that this is not just a mental issue, that this is, it's also what's going on in your body. So what exactly is burnout? So burnout is a state of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion caused by excessive prolonged stress, like I mentioned earlier. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. And as we all learned from last year, is that that's just how it is right now. And it's overwhelming. There's also a quiz right there that you can check to make sure whether or not you are burnout. But granted, if you like the work that you do or you like your employer, chances are you're not going to get the right answers. So it's one of those things where I'm like, quiz I'm a little hesitant in sharing, but it does help you kind of have a better idea of whether or not you're dealing with it. But I want you to explain a little bit more about how COVID-19 has played a huge role in burnout, because we've already in our industry have dealt with burnout for quite some time. But the thing is that emotional burnout is something that's additional to that. So, for example, you're constantly worried that someone in your family is going to end up in the ER or the ICU, or you might lose your job. Things don't feel stable right now. And the problem is that as humans, we like to have that predictableness in a sense that, like, I can book a vacation 3 months out and I would be fine. I don't think about anything between that time, but I feel like I'm fine. Now we can't even book a trip because we don't know how things are going to be. Even with a vaccine, you're still don't know whether or not it's safe to travel. But the difference I want you to understand is that we've always had this idea that we're in control of our life, that it is predictable. And the reality is that's not how life works. Even back before COVID-19, when you booked a trip 3 months out, there's a chance that you may not go on that trip. And that's the reality. So it's good to remind yourself that even when you're going through a pandemic, things haven't really changed in a sense. You cannot predict what will happen. You can kind of have an idea of how to plan things out, granted, yes, but you cannot predict what's going to happen between that time period. So it's really good is to understand that, like, you still have control of your life. Just remember that the pandemic just does a little bit different because you feel like you don't have control. Now, the other thing with emotional burnout is that maybe we've seen an adjustment to our sleep schedule. Maybe we've also noticed that we may have gained weight or we've lost weight. This is one of those reasons why we're very anxious at this time. We might be dealing with depression symptoms as well because we're not around each other. We're not seeing our friends or family in person. And there's also this fear of getting something. But the difficulty of sleeping and concentrating because you're constantly concerned and overly anxious, that is something that COVID-19 has brought to the surface. Also, if the one thing I would tell you is that pretty much every psychologist that I've spoken to about burnout, they've all said that last year they were very concerned about what's going to end up happening after the pandemic and during the pandemic when it comes to mental health. Because I don't know if you know this, but a lot of therapy offices are fully booked and that they can't take in more patients. So all these people that need to get seen aren't getting seen, that want to get seen. And for some, that this is that time period where it's the first time ever that they realize they maybe already had a mental health issue, but they didn't know about that. So it's one of those things, it's a very hard thing because we're not just juggling our own life, we're also juggling the lives of other people. And we also know that we're becoming their therapist sometimes, and we need to be a therapist to ourselves too. And it's really hard. It's a tricky situation. But let's talk about a little bit about how to prevent burnout. So you have a better idea of guidance of how to go about it. And usually it's exercise, eat a balanced diet, practice good sleep habits, ask for help. But it's a little bit hard to do that in a pandemic because gyms are still closed in some areas. Exercise might be hard for you if you're recovering from COVID-19 and you have low energy. Eating a balanced diet can be difficult too because you may have reduced your times going to the grocery stores. Maybe you only go once a week or twice a week. So now getting fresh fruits and veggies are a little bit trickier. Practicing good sleep habits. This is a problem already because the one thing for sure is that we we might have like this procrastination of bedtime where we want to have a sense of control, that we have a life outside our work when we're working at home. So we might prevent going to sleep on time. So it's one of those things, is to be aware of what is going on with you. And that's what I want to talk about in this How to Prevent, is this awareness, because you will be able to pick up on whether or not you're starting to have the symptoms of burnout that I've laid out at the beginning of this talk. If you have any of those, that is a moment for you to reflect. But granted, sometimes it takes us a very long time to recognize we're going through that. And that's okay. So I'm going to show some things how you can actually be more aware before it gets severe. The one thing I would say is journaling. Journal, don't force yourself to journal every day. Never force yourself to do anything. For example, when we're like, I'm going to read all the following books this week, you're setting yourself up to be stressed out, because be kind to yourself. Like, honestly, at the end of the day, is being kind to yourself. Don't force yourself to do anything. Don't set a goal where there's a chance that you might fail. Start very slow, which is like, for example, that whole thing, like, I'm going to read a couple books this week. Change it to, I'm going to read this week. You see, there's a difference. You're not putting more stress and pressure on you to do something. Instead, you're taking it as something that you enjoy. So journaling is the same thing. Don't force yourself to do it every day if you don't want to, but find time to journal at least once a week. Because the thing is that when you journal, what I want you to do is go back through your older entries and see if you see some terms coming up, such as, I feel trapped, I feel hopeless, I feel helpless, I feel empty, I feel like I'm getting angry and sad suddenly, I feel like I feel depressed when I wake up in the morning, I feel overly anxious that I'm constantly on the edge of my seat. You want to pick up those phrases, because chances are you've probably discussed it at like the previous entries. But this is a good way to recognize that you're entering a situation where your health might be at risk. So this is why journaling is important, because you get to have a sense of what's really going on internally onto pages, and for you to go over it and review it and see whether or not how you're feeling. Now, the other thing is to take a break. I know when those things, like, everyone's always feels uncomfortable taking a break from their phone devices, but to be honest, because we're always on 24/7 in this industry in particular, we don't take a break from Twitter. We don't take a break from our social media. We don't take a break from our emails. And the one thing I can tell you is that when you take one day off per week away from your devices, it does help you recharge. Because the reality is that we're so attached to our phones, our computers, that we're not doing anything outside of infosec or outside of our devices. Guess what? There's a life outside of devices, you guys. It's called reading a book. It means painting. It means learning how to play guitar. It means going for a hike. The reality of it is that you want to take one day away from infosec and anything related to infosec, because you need it for yourself. There's a life outside of infosec, and we keep forgetting that. And this is what's also a contributing factor to burnout. Now, if you can't do a full day, that's okay. Do a good number of hours of a chunk instead. Now, the other thing is to write it down. The one thing I can tell you is that I have a Post-it like this, and on there, it's stuff that I need to get done that week. I also have like a little notebook that I carry of all the things that I need to do that ever come to my mind. And the reason you don't want to have it on a device is because usually when we have that idea of like, oh, I need to send that email, or I need to do this project, I totally forgot to do that. It's usually when you're in bed and right about to fall asleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night saying, oh my God, I forgot to send that email. The reality is that when you check your phone, what do you think happens when you put down a note? You go on Twitter. You go check your inbox. You go check the news. The reality of it is that you don't just do one thing on your phone when you pick it up. Usually you're going to go and do other things. And this is the problem when it comes to getting good sleep, because you're not going to get good sleep. You're going to get interrupted sleep. So the important thing is to have it on a piece of paper. I know that sounds really old school, but the reality is you need to write it down. Write it down for your own sake, but also so you can get better sleep at night. So take that little to-do list, have it everywhere where you go. So then you could just jot it down so you don't forget things, but also it gives you a good idea to see how much stuff you've committed to. I remember when I first did this last year and it turned out to be 5 pages of items that I needed to do. And when I saw that, that's when I recognized, like, okay, I have a problem. I'm overcommitting myself. And so after doing that for about 1 month, I got it to 1 page. It's really important to know how much is on your plate, and writing it down gives you an idea how much you could take on more or how much you can remove those things. So it's also good to find out what things can you delegate. But also the thing is that sometimes when we're burned out, it's because we feel disconnected from each other. So volunteering gives you that sense of reconnecting with other people. And let me tell you, volunteering, you don't have to volunteer within your industry. Volunteer outside your industry. Once again, you need to understand that if you do too much in your industry, it can consume you. And then you don't feel like you have a personal life. Instead, you have a work life completely. And this is an ongoing issue in InfoSec, is that we volunteer, we do everything in InfoSec, and we forget about every other industry. We forget about other things that we can do. We forget about being creative outside of our space. We forget these things. And burnout is happening because we're not balancing our personal life and our work life. So we need to balance that. So volunteering once a week is really great. But remember, don't overextend yourself either. Just remember that. Because when you're stressed out and you're feeling burned out, you feel like you're overextended yourself already. Now, the other thing I would tell you is that if you are a manager and you're noticing that your colleagues are not responding to emails on time or they're pushing out due dates, please recognize that the reality of it is that your employees are most likely burned out. To be honest, just assume your team is burned out. They haven't had a break. They haven't gone for a vacation for a while outside their home. It's not staycation. Staycation is great and everything, but it's not the same as a vacation. So if they haven't done that for a while, they're already feeling it. They also feel the pressure of making sure there's not a breach all the time. It's also this pressure of making sure that everyone outside of security doesn't have apathy towards security. And it's also another thing is like, even if you have people that are non-security teams that are also burned out, because even people outside of security are burned out at this time, they're more likely going to click on a malicious link at the end of the day and have a successful phishing situation. And then you're going to have to put out that. So the problem is that you want to be a good manager. And the best way how to do that is to schedule like 15-minute one-on-ones with each team member once a week. If you have a team member that comes to you saying, hey, I need to take time off, don't say, when are you going to take time off? How long are you going to take time off? Who's going to take over the stuff that you're doing? Don't do that. Instead, be like welcoming to it. Okay, you need to take time off. All right, I will sort this out. Do you want me to help you on finding ways how to sort this out, or do you want to work together on this? You tell me what you need. How can I provide it for you? And the thing is when you give it kind of like a how can I help you situation, you are opening the doors for them to be a little bit more transparent of what's going on. And the other thing is that if you're micromanaging people because they're not doing something on time, they're not responding to emails on time, but they usually used to, you're being a jerk at the end of the day, because the reality is it's not, micromanaging is not going to ever help a situation. It's going to escalate a situation. This is how you lose team members. This is how you get a burned out team too, is that if you're over like examining everything that they're doing, you're not being a leader, you're being a dictator. So it's really important for you to be aware is that a good manager is someone who's going to lift that person up and support that person by providing what they need. That's what is needed at this time, is good managers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about if you're already burned out at this moment, which chances are you may be actually, this is how you can bounce back. First things first, there's no pill out there. There's nothing out there that will fix your situation. The only thing that's going to help you is taking time off. That means if you're feeling burned out, the sooner you recognize that you're burnt out, the sooner you take that time off. And I really recommend taking at least 5 days off. And when you take those days off, that means you're literally away from emails. You're away from your phone. If you have another phone that isn't work related, sure, but you don't look up anything about your industry. I mean it, like you're going to hurt yourself in the end. The most important thing is to really just take the time off, watch some TV, read a book, go for a bike ride, go for a drive. The thing is, you want to take a good number of days off. Now, the one thing to know is that you want to take at least 5 days off. So I always recommend is taking off, your Saturday, your Sunday, your Monday, your Tuesday, your Wednesday, and you come back on Thursday and Friday. Now, that's one way how to do it. But it would be great if you could take an entire week off. So, for example, you take off your Saturday, your Sunday, your Monday, your Tuesday, your Wednesday, your Thursday, your Friday, your Saturday, and your Sunday. That gives you a good amount of days to recover. But when you take that time off, once again, you have to let your employer know that you will not be responsive at all during this time. And I know that's a really hard thing to do and that stresses you out. And the reason that many of us don't take time off is because we're worried about our teammates. Because we know that if we take time off, they're already probably spread thin, that they're going to take on our work too. But the reality is that if you don't take the time off, you're going to make more mistakes. You're not taking care of yourself. And if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of others? That's the problem here. So that excuse of, I don't want to take time off because then my colleagues are going to get more work. I hate to break it to you. You not taking the time off when you're burnt out, you're going to make your team worse in the end. It's better for you to take care of yourself so you could come back recovered so then you can help out your team more than ever before. So don't see it as that way. Now, the other thing is that from time to time, we stress out about taking time off because we're worried about our inbox when we get back. There's a trick for this. One thing first is make sure on the first day that you're back, you have a no meetings day set. So no one can do any meetings with you. Now, the other thing is that to tell your colleagues to not to keep you informed while you're away in your inbox, your emails, not on Slack. The reason for that is that we get really overwhelmed when we return. If you're already having conversations on Slack and you're not aware of it, you have also on your emails, you also get signal messages. The reality is keep it at one place. This helps you be able to track the chain and to have an understanding when you get back what is needed. Now, when you first get back, you're going to get overwhelmed with your inbox, but let me tell you, you're going to feel very different from looking at that very large inbox versus looking at a very large inbox currently. Having that time off allows you to actually get really focused faster than ever before. So the thing is, when you go through your emails, just make sure that everyone is ready to keeping you informed in one place. The other thing is to also send an email to your team members if what are some things that you need to prioritize immediately within the next 24 hours. This is important for them to tell you so then also that you don't basically let something fall between the cracks. You're asking them ahead of time when you get back. So that's the trick. Have that one day when you get back, no meetings day, so you could just focus on your inbox and catching up on anything. Also, your out of office message, make sure that it's one day later than when you're actually returning. So then people don't expect you to respond on your first day back. Hopefully that helps you guys. Now, the other thing to note is that the good news is that I'm speaking at Day of Security, so I can just be flat out transparent with everyone on this, is that, ladies, we have a problem. We don't really say no to projects. And the reason for that is because we're constantly worried that we're going to be outed at our company. Whereas it's also the sense of that we're always trying to be perfect. And this is a huge problem for us because we take on a lot more work, other job titles, and we don't get paid for those things. But also the fact is that we're bending backwards. So it's sometimes like you might be a security engineer, but also they're assuming you're going to also be a project manager. They're also assuming that you're going to be a note taker. They're also assuming that you're going to be the person who's going to be like the HR on the team. Like, that's not okay. You should only have one job. You're getting paid for one job. And the other thing is that when you can overcommit, you are setting yourself up for burnout, but also failure. So it's okay to not be perfect, okay? This is the one thing that we have been taught over and over in society, is that we must be perfect. And the reality is that we're not. And that's okay. That's the beauty of life. Life is beautiful because things aren't perfect. It's the abnormal parts of life that makes it special. And the things that you need to recognize is that if you're being over demanded at your work, it might be a good time for you to look elsewhere, because work balance is so important for us in particular. Because if we wanted to start a family, it's hard in this industry. It is so hard to have a kid in this industry and not worry about your job and your career. And the thing is that it shouldn't be that way. So the whole thing is to understand is that there comes to a point in your life where you need to put your life before your work. And that is a very hard lesson for us to learn, because we've been pushing and trying to do whatever we can to climb up that ladder. We overdo it. We put in more hours than our male colleagues, majority of the time, research has shown, because we have to work extra hard always and take on extra roles, extra projects, because we want to make sure that we can have a job and we want to be recognized. We want to climb that ladder. And it's really hard to do that already, because there is discrimination in our industry. And I want you to be aware of that if you are dealing with that, then it's time for you to go somewhere else. And let me tell you, people are hiring. And if you're looking for a job and you're struggling to find a job, reach out to any one of these speakers. They will be able to let you know and be able to find something for you if you're willing to work on it. The reality is that we have to stick together on this front. And the other thing is that we have an industry that has been run by cis white males. And I'll be very transparent here, because I'd rather be brutally honest to you guys. When we have an industry where all the companies are founded by cis white males, that means that environment is set up for those folks, not for anyone who's marginalized. And when you don't have marginalized people sitting on your C-level or your board, that is not going to be trickled down for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is the problem, because we're overworking, overextending ourselves for a job, and to go beyond a manager title is very, very hard still in this industry. It's very hard to climb the ladder. But the reality is that unless you see someone who looks like you on a board, who has your background, it's very hard to get your voice out there and for them to acknowledge that you're stressed out and that they're overworking you and that you don't feel appreciated. So I really do recommend that if you are feeling that way, it might be time for you to look elsewhere, because there are companies that will recognize you. They will appreciate you. They won't overextend you. They won't overwork you. They understand work and life balance. And let me tell you why, because Point 3 Security, they have a great work and life balance. And it's one of those things that you really have, that you understand that companies don't have to always force you to do 80 hours a week of work. It doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way at the end of the day. It's just about getting your work done. If you get your work done, it doesn't matter what hours you're doing it. And that's the thing that I hope that we have learned from this pandemic. But the one thing I will tell you is that it's all about, the reason that burnout is occurring is because you're not investing in yourself. You're letting people walk over you at times. And this is one of the reasons why we get burnout. You're not putting yourself first. In other words, you're constantly making sure that you hit your work targets, and instead of not looking at what you want in your life. And now this is the one point where you need to reevaluate. If you're feeling like you're overextending yourself, you don't feel appreciated or recognized, but yet your work has taken over more of a balance in your life, it's time for you to recognize that you need to work on something. And unfortunately, sometimes that means leaving where you're working. And sometimes that means, having that conversation with a manager that you're overextending yourself, you've accepted too many projects, and you need to reduce it. A good manager will listen and will help you. I want you to understand that. A good manager will accept you for who you are and will work with you to reduce the stuff that's on your plate. They will not reduce you at your job. In other words, like try to find a way to get rid of you. Those are bad bosses. And I've had some really bad managers in my life that have done some really, really bad things. But the reality is that having a good boss helps a lot. And if you don't know whether or not you have a manager that's dependable or easy to work with, it's more about seeing how you can converse with each other about other things and start building that relationship. And if you ever do want tips on that, like let me know. More than happy to help out on that front. But overall, what I want you to take away from this session is that when you feel overwhelmed, do a device detox. That means taking time away from your devices, your phone. When you feel overwhelmed, invest in yourself. The reason you're at this point in your life is because you have been ignoring yourself and your needs and your wants and your desires. And it's not being selfish. I want you to understand that too. It has nothing to do about being selfish. The reality is that when you feel overwhelmed, you need to put yourself first because you cannot take care of another person at this time. The other thing is when you're feeling overwhelmed, ask for help. Sometimes we're scared to ask for help. And the reality is that we shouldn't be. The community has been great for helping me out. They definitely have helped out people I know. It's just asking for help. At the end of the day, people are there for you to help you out. That's how our industry has been able to thrive. How Twitter and infosec it exists is because we're always reaching out to each other. When you feel overwhelmed, write it down. Remember, journaling, having a to-do list allows you to have a recognition of where you're standing, how much you have on your plate, so you're able to break it down a little bit. When you feel overwhelmed, take a break. Remember, the only treatment for burnout is for you to take time off. If you can't take 7 days off, if you can't at least take 3 business days off, but remember to get that Saturday and Sunday in as part of that break. And you know what I said earlier, which is when you feel overwhelmed, put yourself first. There's a reason why airplanes always say, please put the air mask on yourself before helping a passenger next to you, because how are you going to help that person if you haven't helped yourself yet? It's really important to know. When you feel overwhelmed, know that you're not alone. At the end of the day, I hope you know you're not alone in this. Anytime like I speak out about something, I know that there's another person who DMs me saying, I've gone through that too, and I've been dealing with that. And the one thing I want you to know is that no one should feel alone in this industry. We're very much collaborative. We're very much all about connecting with each other. So please note you're not alone at this time. But most importantly, I want you to remember that always ask the question, am I balancing my work and personal life? That means if you look at your to-do list and 80% of it is work related and like that 20% is your personal life, you're not balancing. A good balance is seeing like, 50-50 or, actually more than 50% for personal and less than 50% for work. That's when, you're having a good work and balance life. And if not, now you know the steps to fix that, because the reality is burnout happens when you're not balancing. At the end of the day, that's all that it is that you're not balancing you and the demands. But most importantly, you got this. I had burnout. I didn't take any time off for 2.5 years. And then I took 1 entire week off, got away from all my devices for an entire week. And it felt amazing. I was able to do whatever I can do, roll up my sleeves and run with things. And the reality is that taking that time off, it was really hard for me to accept that because I didn't want to be selfish to take time off. I didn't want to give too much work to my teammates. I was worried about how my company would survive while I take a week off. And let me tell you, you'll be okay. At the end of the day, you will be okay. You need to take this time off for yourself. Last but not least, thank you for Day of Security for having me. Thank you so much for existing. Also, everyone who's watching this, if you have any questions, I'm going to check right now. But also feel free to DM me also on Twitter or Instagram, whatever works best for you. But more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to take a look at what questions you guys have. What was the company that I mentioned that has a great work-life balance? Point 3 Security has a great work-life balance in a sense, because the founder, he has kids himself, and like a lot of people at the company have kids, and so there's already this really good environment for balancing like having kids and like being a great employee. What other questions we got? Oh, let's see here. What signs should we look for to help us recognize burnout in others? Okay, so there is one way how you can do that. Remember when I said about emails, and when you send text messages to people or call them and they don't respond for a while? That's your sign right there. Also, when you talk to them, if they feel a little bit cynical about things, that's another way to note that that's what's going on. Oh, that's so cool. PagerDuty, a female CEO. I have to admit, if I look at any company or anything, I always look at the board and the C-level to see if there's any like marginalized people being represented. And if there are, I like immediately will tell people about this company, because that's like what's so needed at this time. We need to have more marginalized people on boards and C-levels, because I swear to God, I think that burnout would be reduced significantly for people if we had people that understand what it's like to be marginalized in this space. What other questions do you guys have? Yes, feel free to send any LinkedIn requests. More than happy to accept any of them. Oh, that's really cool. And a majority female security team. Oh, see? I love hearing that, because I want to see more of that. Like, I want to see that be at least the 50% at this point. Anything else that I can help anyone else with? Any other questions? All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that this was helpful. If you do have any questions that come up, feel free to reach out anytime, like on LinkedIn. Also, feel free on Twitter, and also on Instagram. Whatever makes you happy and floats your boat, that'd be great. Is there a way to see this again as a reminder for balance? Yes, there is already a recording of this exact same talk on my YouTube channel. So if you go to my website, chloemessdaghi.com, there is a playlist, a video playlist, and you can find that YouTube link that will take you to all the videos, and Burnout is on there. So that should be great for you. All right. Excellent. Well, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Day of Security experience.